All right, man. Well, hey, as we record this, it is Friday, March 3rd. So the final open workout just got announced yesterday.
Sure did. Yep. I just got back home from Omaha. We had a great stop over there at the fantastic Stacy Tovar's gym. They got a really cool facility there that they've built from the ground up. And it's an amazing spot. So if you ever get a chance, highly recommend a drop in at CrossFit Omaha.
So since it happened yesterday, today's Friday, can you take a breath or can you not take a breath until the final score submission window thing kind of ends?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's the next couple days. It's just waiting for the scores to start rolling in, and then the team reviews. And fingers crossed, you have a lot of clean runs. You know, everybody just wants a clean run so that there's not a lot of judgment to be made. That's always the ideal. So athletes out there, you can make your life and our life a lot easier if you just make it clean. But there's always some level of review that we have to do.
Sure.
Where there's some calls that need to be made. So, but that's not until the score submission deadline, really. So next week will be a big week because the score window closes, and then we have that week to try to resolve the leaderboard and lock the leaderboard before we send out invites for the quarterfinals. So it's very much a quick turn for that next stage.
All right, so still busy. Short answer, still busy.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
So the point of this show is kind of like we did after the games, is just to walk through the workouts. You know, what made the repeat that you chose had so many options, what made that capture your attention, and then we'll chat about the next couple weeks as well. And so people love, we've chatted programming several times. We had two shows all about it specifically, one show about the games events. And so now we'll kind of take that same stance with the Open. So with no further ado, maybe I should say for the people at home listening, when people ask me what the Open is, here's what I say. But now you feel free to put your spin on it as well. But I kind of let people know the Open's an interesting deal, an interesting task especially from a programming standpoint, because let's say you're throwing down at the games. Well, everyone there is a games athlete, or you're doing a local neighborhood throwdown, and you kind of know the people that are going to be showing up. But the Open's interesting because in a relatively small number of workouts, you want to create workouts that are not only fun in a weird, crazy CrossFit way, or why would anybody do them, but also are highly participatory so that you can get a huge swath of the population doing it, not just the games athletes. But then those same workouts that regular folks can do also need to somehow filter and pre-screen along the way to by the time that it's over, you have identified, even though we're all playing together, the cream actually rose to the top. And hey, it would be great to do that without an exorbitant amount of gear, without an exorbitant amount of space. I have to take into account how things are going to be filmed. All of those things have to happen. So the Open is a unique animal from that. We get to the games, it's like, I can do whatever I want. But the Open is you're operating with a tight window, and you have to somehow, it's for you and me, but then it's also for whoever's reigned king and queen. And that's interesting.
Yeah, and I think that summation is really, really spot on. And it's not the average person's job to think about those types of things, but the Open is really big, and it's really hard to get your arms around the whole thing. And even if you just start looking at the different divisions that we offer now, if you've been around the CrossFit world for a long time, there was a time where it was just the workout and everybody did that. And there was no such thing as a scaled division or a difference in age group variation or anything like that. It was just one and done. And if you didn't fit into that particular box, well, you figured it out or you didn't. Since then we've progressed a little bit, which is great. But we've got obviously the men's and women's division. There's kind of the cumulative team division. We have 9 different age group divisions. We've got 8 adaptive divisions, so the list goes on. And it's got to be all those things that you mentioned. It's got to separate. It's got to be something that the community can rally behind. And so to me, a lot of it comes down to mindset and the culture that I think I would hope the opportunity to kind of test yourself starts to breed. And that culture to me is that it's not about, can I do everything that's put in front of me? And can I, just finish all of the tests? It's how far can I take it given my current state of fitness? And that's going to be different for everybody. So I think sometimes people come into the open with the expectation of, well, if I can't do this thing from start to finish, somehow it's not going to be a good experience, or I've failed, or my fitness isn't up to the task. And it's like, no, that's not at all the way that I think people should approach it. I think that the approach should much more be in line with, what can I do with what I have? And if that means I don't finish something, that's just reflective of my current level. It's not reflective of, my character or my effort or anything of that nature. In the same way that there's plenty of other events that take place all over the place that are challenges, and those challenges often require that people aren't going to finish them. Only the very best get through. Like an adventure race is a great example, where you've got something that's long, requires a ton of planning and prep, and the very best and the most experienced, they'll make it through that. But there's plenty of people that they get to the halfway mark and they're like, that's it for me.
Right. Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that experience that they had up until that point is meaningless. Far from it. That can be really, really cool. And the value is not in just finishing. So anyway, that's kind of a bigger picture thing. So to kind of loop that back into what we've been talking about, recently, I do think that there is a difference between training day to day and then competing or taking a test. And this is a great kind of contrast, where in your day-to-day training, no, you shouldn't be failing. You shouldn't be taking it to the limit every single session. There's room to put those bricks in the wall, so to speak, and have them stack up into something really, really good. Once you take the test, though, it's a different animal. It's not there to drive your fitness forward necessarily. So if you think about the two kind of Venn diagrams, on one side of that Venn diagram, you have things that I do to get fitter. And on the other hand, you have things that I do to test my fitness and see where I'm at. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of overlap. So for example, if I do 23.1, sure, I'm going to get a training effect out of that. But the primary goal of doing that is not to push my fitness further along. It's to see, where am I right now? And so again, there's a lot of overlap, but the primary goal isn't necessarily to build my fitness when I'm doing that test. And it's a slightly different mind frame.
Yes, and it's funny that you mentioned 23.1, because the same workout could serve both purposes. It could be both
Absolutely.
Your training for the day, or it could be a test, and it could be in how you approach it. So for example, I guess we'll dive into 23.1 here, which is a repeat from 2014.
14.4.
So I really like this workout, and I can somewhat prove it. Because there's a lot of open workouts over the years that have accumulated, and they're all good to some degree, but some of them catch my eye and some of them don't so much. And out of all of them, this particular one, I've actually programmed for Linchpin twice since 2014.
Oh, cool. That's
cool. We did it in 2017 because I liked it so much, and then we did it again in 2021 because I like it. I like it so much. Like, I think I think it's a great one. So when I saw that you picked this for the first one, I was like, I've liked that one since the day that I saw it. And in 2017 when we did it, and in 2021 when we did it, it wasn't for the open. It was as a training stimulus that day to improve your fitness based upon the workouts that we'd done recently and what was coming up later. So it has a training adaptation for sure.
No question.
Then when somebody says, today's the day, then you're like, oh, I'm going to get after it in potentially a different way, almost like that pacing versus full send thing that we had, and has a bit of a different feel. And so when it popped up as a testing workout, I was like, that's the beauty. So out of all the crazy repeats that you could have, why'd this one catch your eye?
Well, I think probably for a lot of the same reasons that you like it. I think it's a really kind of elegant ramp up to the more challenging elements later in the workout. And so, we're talking about how the open needs to be something that everybody can take a shot at. but you need a separator for the best. And this is a really great example of that, in my opinion, where, almost everybody can hop on the rower and crank out 60 calories. Almost everybody can hop up on the pull-up bar and get a toes to bar.
Right.
They may not finish that set of 50. That's a lot, but they can chip away at it and get some points on the board. And that theme kind of follows all the way through until you have the most challenging movement, the muscle up, where not everybody who's going to take this test is going to have that capacity, specifically when they're that fatigued. But half of the battle is just getting there with enough time to even get some work done. And so, for somebody who's less advanced and they're still working on some of those skills, I think that's where the difference in mindset needs to be a little bit more pronounced. If you have somebody who's very advanced, this workout could be an amazing training session because they can get through it and they can push hard and, they can do all those things that you'd expect out of a training session. Whereas somebody who's still developing some of those skills, they won't be able to have as much training effect because they'll get stopped by some of those skills. Now, that's valuable information as a test, but it might not be as effective as a training session. So that's the kind of difference in mentality going into it. I'm not expecting it necessarily to be a training stimulus for that reason, even though, like you pointed out, there's a big overlap. But anyway, so to get back to the point of it, I love the breadth of this test. I think it's a really great example of what CrossFit is looking for when we describe fitness. You can't win it by just being really good at rowing. You can't win it by just being really good at cycling a barbell. You can't win it by just being really good at muscle ups. All of those factors are going to be really important, and they have to come together in a way that you can do it all. So for me, it's just such a great example of everything that we talk about all the time. Shout out to, this is one of Dave's workouts from back in the day. And I think it's awesome.
It's a beauty. It's a beauty for sure. And it's a beautiful trap as well. I mean, it's big chunks of work. It's 50 toes to bar, right? I mean, so it's tough to call something with 50 toes to bar a trap. You should see that coming, generally speaking.
Gotta be smart.
But then you're like, okay, you're not going to burn it down on the row. So that's not a trap. You're like, okay, the 50 toes bar, that blows. But then 40 wall balls, that's an uncomfortable step, but it's not the end of the world. And hey, the power cleans at what seems to be a reasonable weight, and then we'll see what I can do on the rings. But then you get to that 135 barbell, and it feels not like you thought 135 pounds should feel like. And your vision of doing 3 sets of 10 goes out the window, and you're doing quick singles. And then, I shouldn't even say they're miserable singles. So I like a lot of that, where all the things hit in a particular way to make how you thought it should go suddenly like, oh, plan B is happening, because this thing's sneaky. Maybe we take one quick step back, if it can be quick.
Sure.
And as the Open was even approaching, we've done shows before on just programming. Where did you start with something like time domains, or I want to go below parallel, or the heavy barbell is going to come here? Yeah. Okay.
I started more broad than that. So the big factors that I wanted out of this year's Open, number one, a repeat was like a sticky that I had, because we didn't have a repeat in 2022. And so, that's something that's been a staple of the Open for a long time. We didn't see one last year. So I thought, okay, we definitely need a repeat this year. And I wanted that repeat to, be something that was really awesome and that people liked to do and thought, was a valuable test. A lot of times the repeats are the variations on Fran, the thruster pull-up style. And I kind of wanted to move away from that as a repeat in the Open. And then I wanted to add some new elements into the Open. And I wanted to have a strength component. So those were kind of the big buckets that I was looking for at the 20,000 foot view. Something repeated, something new, something heavy. Those were kind of the broad strokes.
And as you started to gently or slowly polish those, off the top of your head, do you remember any other repeats that were in the running?
Yeah, I had a bunch that I had kind of gone through and
What
revisited.
was a close contender? What was an almost made it, if you remember?
Oh, it almost made it was, there was an ascending ladder of handstand push-ups and cleans where the reps
Like a
went
185
up,
clean.
Yes.
I know exactly the one you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because I like that one too.
Yeah, it was a Scott Panchik versus Josh Bridges matchup, I think, from back in the day. So that one was close. There were a couple others that I can't recall off the top of my head, but I had like 4 or 5 of them.
Okay.
And I kept kind of playing around with plugging one in and then seeing what was kind of left over.
Right.
Because that's a big, with only 3 things that you have available to you, or 3 weeks, I guess I should say, you know, anything that you choose kind of deselects other things that you want to do later on.
Absolutely.
So, you know, I'd put something in that repeat spot and then see, okay, well, that means I can't do X and Y later. That's not going to work. So took it out, played around with that, and ultimately landed with the repeat of 14.4, which I think was great.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a beautiful one. You know, it's an open workout. Now, not to get off track, that, not to say that it would have fit for this one, but another open one I've done a couple times because I really like it. And it does have a fair amount of skills because it has double unders and muscle ups in the same workout. So it could be exclusionary to some degree. But I think it's also 14 minutes. It's the double unders, wall balls, and ring muscle ups.
That was in the mix.
Oh, yeah. I like that one a lot.
Yep.
I think Julie Fouché went head to head against Lauren Brooks on that one.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that was beautiful workout.
There was another similar one that was more recent where it was, oh gosh, I'm going to misremember it now, but it was, I believe, wall ball, muscle ups, and rowing, and you just had big chunks of them, and you could partition it any way that you wanted. That was another one that was a close contender.
So that's cool. It's cool to hear that. And then you had the something new in your head with that, which that's just a big puffy cloud. Did you have any sense of what the something new might be, or just, hey, as long as it's something new, it'll work itself out? Or did you have some ideas coming in?
Yeah, there were a couple. You know, the shuttle run was an obvious contender. I think running as a modality is, you have to test running if you're going to test fitness. And it's never been done in the open. So that was an obvious contender. You know, we did it as kind of not a trial. It was definitely more intentional than that. But it was a part of some of the later stages in the online competitions last year. So quarterfinals and some of the online semifinals for the age group categories. So we got to kind of see how it would test in competition in those formats. And it's like, yeah, I think it's appropriate to do it in the open. So that was kind of fun. And the burpee pull-up was a movement that I thought for a long time would be a great open movement because it's hard for sure. And it's definitely a legitimate test of fitness. But it's also kind of sneaky in the way that there's a lot of people that can do more than they think with that movement. Because, you know, you may not be able to get up there and rep out 20 kipping pull-ups, but having the option of being able to jump into that pull-up or jump up and do a single kipping pull-up, people can get deeper into that than they think. And so it's a little sneaky in that way. At first blush, you look at it and you think it's advanced, but, you know, there's a lot of people that could really go for it, even though they might not be pull-up champs at this point.
I was going to say, so let's move on to 23.2 because you're chatting two out of the, the 2 elements that are there, which was the shuttle run and the burpee pull-up. So 23.2A was as many reps as possible in 15 minutes of 5 burpee pull-ups and then 10 shuttle runs. And the shuttle run, 1 rep of the shuttle run was 25 feet out and 25 feet back. So there's 500 feet of running. Am I doing my math right on that? So 5 burpee pull-ups, 500 feet of running, broken up as 10 shuttle runs. That's a round. And then as the rounds increase, you add 5 burpee pull-ups each time. Shuttle run stays the same, but 5 burpee pull-ups get added every single time. And then, there was a heavy component after that. So let's start with, you settled on those 2 movements there. And so now, take it from there. You like the burpee pull-up because you can kind of keep chunking out the work?
You got it. Yep. And it's one of those things where there's never really a true failure point. So for example, we go back to 23.1 and you get to the power cleans. They're heavier than you expect because of the fatigue. it's unlikely that you're going to be able to just crank through those in a straight set or a big sets even. You do reach a point where you're that's it. That's all you got. You're fatigued enough that you have to step away from it for a second. With the burpee pull-up and the shuttle run, that's never really the case. You can always make that down and back. Even if you have to slow down, you'll make the distance, and then same with the burpee pull-up. You can always put your hands back down on the ground and get to the floor, and you can always stand back up and make that single pull-up. Maybe not always, but pretty darn close. So there's really nowhere to hide in that. The pace becomes just unrelenting. And so it's a very different kind of stamina where you have to sustain the output instead of knowing that it's going to be small sets and basically small intervals. So that kind of sustained effort is like sneaky hard to try to keep up with. So that was an element that I really liked. And then I look back over a lot of open workouts from the past, and what I realized is that, obviously there's lots of different variations and combinations of movements and modalities, but very few monostructural and gymnastics pairings. I think there's only one in open history, and that was the double unders and wall walks from 2021.
Okay.
So I thought that would be a really cool combination to bring back, but to quote the famous Pat Sherwood line, "Not a barbell in sight."
Right, my friend.
And
yes.
So no savior with a heavy load to give you that excuse to slow down. So I really like the idea of having a monostructural gymnastics pairing. I had those movements in my mind already as kind of potential new additions to the open. Certainly not new to the CrossFit world, but new in that context. And so I thought, all right, let's see what we can craft with those two in mind. And I would say the preliminary versions of that were shorter and set reps on each movement.
Okay. So why did you choose the different reps? Can be increasing burpee pull-ups.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it just didn't offer enough time to really separate because both of those movements kind of have a set cadence. If they're too short, the athletes that are really, really good at the top of the heap, they'll basically stay on the same pace the whole time, and it'll be really hard to separate people and establish a spread. So, after looking at a few athletes.
Go ahead. I was going to say that gets back to what we're saying at the beginning is these workouts have to not only I can do them, you can do them, but there has to be a way for that separation to occur.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, if you or I were to do these together, like surely there'd probably be somebody who'd come out on top.
Right. Yep.
But we're not the top of the heap. And at that very tippy top, there's so many really amazing athletes that wouldn't need to slow down within that shorter time frame, that you just have a lot of clustering at, the same place, which would basically come down to little things that aren't as much a measure of fitness, like transition time, things like that, optimizing your setup within your facility. And anytime you're looking at that as a significant factor, I think it takes away from the purity of the fitness test. So stretching it out a little bit made a lot of sense to allow people to either be able to hang on and truly separate themselves or start to taper off because there's just a little bit too much length for them to keep that pace.
I have a feeling that if we were doing this in front of a live audience, that somebody would be like, okay, that all makes sense. Great. But hey, week number 1 was a 14-minute AMRAP. Week number 2 was a 15-minute AMRAP. Man, that's just about the same thing. What's the deal with that?
Yeah. Yeah, great. And that's a easy observation to make. And one that, we had to get comfortable with was like, yeah, people are definitely going to look at that and say, well, where's the variety? You're like, okay, well, if you look beyond that surface level single focus of variation, you're going to see a lot under the hood. You've only got 2 movements. Like I said, that combination of modalities is relatively untouched in the open. And the sustained effort versus, 23.1, which is very much, you're going to do it in chunks almost all the way. The row is the exception. You'll do the row in a straight shot, but almost everything else after that row is intervals. You're going to do 4 or 5 or whatever that number is for you. Maybe it's bigger than that. You're going to rest, and then you're going to take those strategic sets all the way across, which is a very different 15 or 14 minutes than a 15-minute effort that you don't get that opportunity. It's just sustained the entire time. I suppose the difference would be if you wanted to simplify it to something like running, if I did a minute of running with a 30-second rest repeated until I got to a 15-minute all in versus a 15-minute how far can I get within that time frame. So same modality, same time frame, but very different experience.
And 15 minutes is also, on the positive side, it's just a really useful time domain.
Yeah,
you know, like
absolutely.
It's not too long, it's not too short. It's a great relative window to be in. I like this workout for exactly what you just said, not a barbell in sight, which immediately I know makes everybody grumpy bear. And if most people are grumpy bear, that turns me into happy bear. So I loved it immediately. I was like, oh yeah, here you go. You want to get a good score? Guess what? It's time to suffer, my friends.
You gotta want it. Yep.
Because like you said, you can always do another burpee pull-up. You can always shuffle your feet on the run. So it's kind of like Helen. So guess what? You want a better score, your lungs are going to burn, which just makes me smile inside. I don't know why, but that sort of human suffering is the joy in my life. And so it made me so happy. And the burpee pull-up, I mean, first of all, yes, you're not moving an external object, but don't mistake that for not doing a lot of work. You are, talk about a huge range of motion. You're going to take your center of mass from all the way on the ground, stand up straight, then jump in the air and get your chin over bar. That's a big, big range of motion, you know, and then the shuttle runs I'm familiar with as well. And just, you can, if you're unfamiliar with them, it can be tough to get into a comfortable rhythm with them because you constantly feel like you're accelerating, then you're decelerating, and then you're turning, and then you're pivoting. It's this great movement that potentially doesn't get the love that it deserves because it's a good one. And that paired with the burpee pull-up, again, you're not going to recover you're going to want to recover your lungs probably on the shuttle runs because you're going to be tensing up yourself when you hit the burpee and go up to there, but you can't really recover your lungs on either one if you're trying to win. You've got to burn both candles, man. So it made me smile. I like this one.
That's the way we saw it play out too. When we saw athletes around the world take it on, and then certainly when Roman Krenikov and Pat Vellner did it head to head during the announcement, they were neck and neck until the last minute or two. And then Roman managed to keep his pace and Pat dropped off just a little bit. And that was enough to open the door. And it was basically kind of a chicken match, right? Who can keep this pace just longer than the next guy? And I think that's really fun to see it play out. So yeah, it was cool. And one other thing too on the burpee pull-up that I think is often overlooked is that it's not the most technical movement in the scheme of things. For sure. But as you start to fatigue, what really separates people is consistency. And can they consistently get to the same position so that they know when they transition to the pull-up bar that they're going to actually be able to grab it? They're not fishing around for, where that bar happened to be because they jumped up in a funny way. So there is a coordination aspect that fatigue really impacts. And if you're able to stay consistent with that, even though it's a pretty basic technique, if you can stay in it, it's going to pay dividends at the end of that workout when everybody else is kind of falling apart. So there's also a little sneaky coordination aspect to it too, which I like and I don't think gets a lot of consideration.
Allow me for a moment just to blow the dust off of my old school commentator analyst hat.
Yeah, give it to me.
This is nothing against Pat Vellner, okay, who I consider a friend. He is a tremendous athlete. I mean, for sure. You have to say that because you were from Canada. Okay, look, here's the deal. He's a fantastic guy. I didn't know who was going to win the thruster because I wasn't sure as to whose numbers were what, okay? But on 23.2A, where I'm going to oversimplify it down to an old school Sam Briggs willing to suffer and die, like a Steve Prefontaine sort of an atmosphere. I'm sorry. Roman's going to take that, in my mind, beyond a shadow of a doubt. I can't remember if I told this to you or somebody else. As soon as I saw that lineup, I was like, oh, this is over. I don't know, it's over because Roman Krenikov, he missed the birth of his child to compete at the games.
Yeah, he's committed.
he's committed. Okay, like he's not going to give you 99% effort.
No,
Okay,
yeah.
that dude, that could have been he's going to die on the field of play right there. I was like, I don't want to go against that dude. You kidding me? He's all in. Not to say that Vellner's not, but missing the birth of your child is another level. Okay.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. And you can tell too, which it was really cool to see, he's obviously not new to competitive CrossFit, but he's new in the sense that he's only kind of had these opportunities to play on the big stage very recently. And because of that, you can see how much he feeds off of the energy and the support of the crowd and things like that. And it's just so cool to watch that. You can see kind of starting to fade a little bit. It's the minutes are wearing on and the crowd is behind him, and all of a sudden he's got that second wind, and it's just great,
Mm-hmm. It was fun to watch. So 23.2A finishes, and we've previously interviewed an exercise scientist, and I think exercise scientists would agree that 23.2A is the perfect way to warm up for a 1-rep max thruster.
Precisely. That's exactly it. You look up the physiology textbook and they tell you that's how you prime the system for max effort. No, but that's what CrossFit's all about.
What made you choose the lift that you did, and what made you do it, I guess, when you did, week 2 after this workout?
Well, if you take a look at the themes that we already kind of established, where I wanted something repeated and then contrasted with something new, the thruster was kind of both in a way. Like obviously the thruster, I think it's the most repeated movement in open history. I think it's between that and double unders, if memory serves. So people kind of expect that a thruster is going to be part of the test. That is definitely going to be a repeat year over year, at least in people's minds. And so I thought, okay, how can we take a movement that people are going to want to see and expect to see and do it in a way that is not going to be what they expect? Mm-hmm. And so when you think thruster in the open, or when you think thruster generally, it's typically going to be moderate load and moderate repetitions for sustained sets. And that's a great application of the thruster. I mean, that's really the bread and butter of where that movement shines, But there's a really cool strength component to it as well. And, I thought we need some sort of strength test. I didn't want to fall back on the traditional, snatch or clean and jerk for a max. And I thought, okay, we've never done it in this way in the past. Let's give it a shot. And I'd also thought, the possibility early of having a heavier thruster, 4 reps, but that introduces like a really difficult challenge sometimes to get that loading right, So for example, the Roman Krenikovs, the Pat Vellners of the world, 185-pound thruster for moderate reps, that could be viable. But for the other 98% of us, that's not happening. That's not an option.
Thank you.
So exactly. So I thought, okay, this is going to give us enough latitude where people can choose their own adventure with what a heavy thruster is, quote unquote. And the best will absolutely get the shine.
And not I don't know just how much strong, but strong under fatigue with your heart racing.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome.
Strong when you don't want to be strong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And did you see some of the top performances? Did you follow the men's and women's winners of Part B? Were just absolutely absurd. I mean, we had a 240-pound thruster from the top female competitor.
Are you kidding me?
It's unbelievable. And and then and she looked like she had more in the tank. She failed her attempt afterwards, but I think that's just from the cumulative fatigue. I'm certain that is not her true max. And then on the men's side, a gentleman, he's an affiliate owner in Central California, and he got 119 reps on Part A, which is no slouch. I mean, that's a decent score, especially when you contrast it with the fact that he then thrustered 375 pounds.
Are you kidding me? I had no idea that number.
Pat, you have to go watch the video. It's absurd. And again, to know that he did that after putting out 119 reps, this isn't some guy that just logged a rep and then sat on the bench for 14 minutes. He was a legitimately hard effort. Yeah. And then to be able to pick up that weight and thrust it overhead. I mean, it's something to see.
375 is a really great deadlift.
I was going to say, I'm happy to deadlift at these days. That's like,
Man, that's insane. Okay, I will have to go check that out.
Yeah.
You know, week 2 is my favorite week. I'll go ahead and say that, because I also have this in my, well, I should also just let my affiliate know, get ready, because this will be one of the things that we do see in the future, kind of like I programmed, what was week 1 in 2017 and 2022. Like, I like what you came up with for week 2 here. This is going to be added to the repertoire to make some appearances, because it's one of those things where I think if you're doing okay at both of them, I like a singular workout or singular experience where I could almost make my draft pick from this one workout. If I'm creating a zombie apocalypse team, if you're having a zombie apocalypse team, you don't necessarily have to walk on your hands, okay? I'm looking for lungs, strength, like just some grunt work capacity. So if you excelled at week 2, you got conditioning, that's for sure, or you didn't do well in the first part, and you've got body weight and gymnastics movements down, or you wouldn't have done well in the first part. But then you also had to take, as much as I said that burpee pull-up, big range of motion for your body, right? Okay, on that thruster, well, there's a huge range of motion as well. You're going to take a heavy object. You can't take it any further. You're going to move it from the ground all the way to fully extended overhead. That's as far as you can take it. And then you're forcing them to take it in a way that isn't just a power clean and jerk or something. You're going to test their below parallel squatting strength before you drive it overhead. And actually, that leg strength is going to be mission critical, because you can't jerk it. So you have to have that below parallel ferocious strength to finish the press out on the thruster. And so just doing well at week 2, again, I don't know if you can walk on your hands, but if you crushed week 2, both workouts, you are an animal. You're on my zombie apocalypse team just from that performance. So I personally, this is my favorite week 2.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I agree. I'm a big fan of when you can take something like that and see such a wild spread. Mm-hmm. And if for no other reason, to bring it back to, kind of your opener on this particular test is, hey, for many years, people were convinced that physiologically that wasn't supposed to happen. You were, by the book, you were either an endurance athlete or you were a strength athlete, and never should the two meet. It was not going to happen. Don't even try. Don't even, consider trying to have that kind of range, because you're wasting your time. And it's just something you shouldn't even think to pursue. And I love that there are thousands, tens of thousands of people around the world now that just A, don't accept that, and B, can prove that it's nonsense.
Well, yes, and I think I'm going to get my exact placings and my exact year wrong. You can probably correct me on that, but probably one of the first times that contrast happened on the world stage in CrossFit was when the games were a lot smaller, when you saw Miko Salo back at the ranch crush the trail run and then be somewhere in the top 3 or 5 on the deadlift ladder. And you're like, whoa, that person just did that well on a long trail run, and they just lifted what? Well, that doesn't make any sense. And it's like, we've changed the rules, everybody.
He just missed a 505 deadlift, and I believe it was due to grip failure, not because he couldn't get the lockout. It was absolutely wild to see. I still have that burned in my memory as well. Mm-hmm. That exact contrast of fresh off the trail run, beating most of the field at a lift in short order right after the fact.
And crazy. Before we move on to the final week, I'll have to give just since we spoke heavy thrusters, I'll have to give just another old school shout out to your friend of mine, Mr. Chuck Carswell, who back before it was popular, back when I was on the road with Chuck, so this is probably like 2007 or 8 or something like that. I remember seeing that human being do thrusters with 275.
Doesn't surprise me.
Right. I mean, 14 years ago, it's like, I think he just did a single, but I think I looked over and I was like, did you just do a thruster with that? He's like, yeah. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's ridiculous. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Final week of competition. This one, I was actually out to lunch yesterday with my wife, and I looked at my phone. It was like 12:30, and just as our food was arriving, so I was in a very leisurely state of mind. I was like, Old Bosman right now is that he's about to go live and announce week 3. I'm waiting on my lunch here. You got a different thing going on. So you were just there yesterday announcing this, making it happen. Take me through. Well, I'll walk everyone here through week number 3.
Sure.
So you've got, starting with a 6-minute time cap, you complete as many reps as possible of 5 wall walks, 50 double unders, 15 snatches at, it says weight 1, 95 pounds for the men, 65 for women. Mm-hmm. Then 5 wall walks, 50 dubs, and then the reps go down to 12 snatches at weight number 2. Gets bumped up to 135 for men and 95 pounds for women. So you've got double unders, wall walks, snatches, 2 different loadings. And it says, if completed before the 6-minute time cap, another 3 minutes get added. And so then you've got the wall walks go away, and now we're going to bring in strict handstand push-ups, big sets, 20, yikes. The 50 double unders remain, and you've got 9 snatches, but the weight, of course, has gone up, 185 for men, 125 for women. And if you're able to complete that, was that just one time through that?
Yeah.
If you're able to complete that, you've earned yourself a bit more time, and you are now the proud recipient of 20 more strict handstand push-ups, which I'm sure are not going to interfere at all with locking out a heavy barbell overhead, 50 double unders, and then 6 snatches at the final weight, an obnoxious 225 pounds for men and 155 pounds for women. So that was a lot if you're just listening to it in audio format. So basically, here's what it is. You start off with wall walks, double unders, and snatches. The weight is welcoming, 95, 65. Then the weight gets a little bit heavier, but by the time you get there, it don't feel like a little bit heavier. It also feels really, really bad. But if you get through it, you earn more time. Now we get strict handstand push-ups, the dubs stay, the weights get heavier. Did you make it through that? Great. You get one more bonus. 20 more strict handstand push-ups, 50 more dubs, and that final heavy weight of 225 or 155. So that's the workout right there. But that's what it is on paper. But what was it in your mind and your decision making and your process?
Yeah, well, when we get back to it, I'm a big fan of just a classic triplet monostructural gymnastics weightlifting combination. And so I thought that would be a great cap to the 3 weeks. And also, to go back to the theme that we were talking about initially, I wanted something that was going to be something that most people could take a crack at, but the very best would be the only ones that could get all the way through.
To say the least.
Yeah, exactly. And so the mindset, I think, that's kind of interesting around this one, because, people always have strong opinions about open workouts in particular, and that's fine. There's some people that I think take it in the spirit that it's intended, and they say, okay, this is going to be a 6-minute workout for me. And truly, like for me, I'll be happy to get out of the 6 minutes, And if it was just written that way, for time, those first 2 rounds with a 6-minute time cap, people probably wouldn't look at it twice, because that would be the expectation. But because there's these other 2 rounds, that some people get in this negative mindset where if I can't go through the whole thing, somehow I'm shortchanged. Mm-hmm. And I think that's unfortunate, because on its face, those first 2 rounds are plenty for most of us.
Oh, yeah.
And I know that that's something, you preach with your programming all the time. And so the challenge really is, can I put the hammer down for what is a much significantly shorter time frame than what I experienced on weeks 1 and week 2. I have to go. I don't have time to really think about it if I want to try to extend out and get into that challenge round, so to speak. So it's designed to be basically a sprint. You have to really go for it. And hey, many of us aren't going to make that time cap, and that's okay. There's still plenty of meat on the bone there. But for those that have that capacity, have that technical skill, now they can really let themselves shine by showing what they can do with that little bit of extra time. And I'll tell you, there's going to be plenty of high-level competitors that do not finish. And that's okay.
Sure. Yeah.
It's only the very, very, very few that are going to have a time as their score instead of a reps completed for their score.
The wall walks and the handstand push-ups, like I said in the little description, nothing about that is making a heavy snatch, the receiving position of it, any easier. You could have probably chosen gymnastics movements that had less of an interference component, or was an interference component on the high side part of the equation?
Yeah, it was. It was a very conscious choice for a few reasons. Choice number one, or consideration number one, is that it really demands good snatch technique. If your technique is really smooth and polished with the snatch, you're getting under and punching into that lockout without a lot of press. And so it's really just a support position that your shoulders are asked to do in the snatch if your technique is really, really good. And so if your technique is a little sloppy or a little loose, or you're relying on this technique that does have a pretty significant press out component, you're going to be punished for that a little bit. So that was one consideration.
I found myself pressing out the 2 1/4 a lot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, so there, I was trying to break you of that habit, Pat.
I appreciate it. Why?
Yeah. Well, I got one more thing on that too. So, number one, it's, hey, technique matters. And if your technique is really good, that fatigue won't impact you as much. Obviously, it's still a factor, but it won't impact you to the same degree. And then second, it allowed a range of weights that didn't have to approach the max weight of the field while still remaining challenging. So for example, 225 and 155 for the high level men's and women's field, on its face, that's not crazy heavy for those guys, as kind of unbelievable as that is. But under those conditions, it's a real challenge and it's really heavy. But if you were to just compare it on paper to, the average 1 rep max of the top of the field, it wouldn't be that significant. So it gave a little bit of latitude there where we could pick weights that were challenging under those conditions, but didn't have to be bumping up against the very, very top of what's possible.
And for the handstand push-ups, why strict versus kipping?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that kipping handstand push-ups have a place, but I think that oftentimes, and we've talked about this a lot, people rush into the kip. And, frankly, it ends up putting a lot of stress on the neck and the head. I think especially in a competitive environment like this, where people are striving for their first reps of something, it can encourage some bad behavior. And so I thought, okay, let's have people challenge themselves, chipping away at the strict version after they've earned into that round, as opposed to trying to overreach a little bit with something that maybe they can't control yet under those conditions. So for that reason, I like the strict, even though, admittedly, there's not going to be as many people that can get as many reps, but also that's kind of the point.
And I like it also just because it's just another type of strength. And so somebody could sharpshoot me because I'm saying this in real time, thinking it out in real time, and it's not as polished as I would say it if I had some time to think it over. Obviously, you have to be strong with handstand push-ups to do them fast and kip them. But you have some people who are so competent at the technique and the hip drive to overcome a potential lack of pure pressing strength in the shoulders. So the fact that it is strict is obviously technique and all that stuff is still there and relatively important, but it is more of a gymnastics strength element compared. Then you also have the barbell, which is a weightlifting strength element. So it's not totally strength on just one side. So I liked the fact that it was body weight strength and barbell strength while fatigue. Well, I mean, just it was cool. I think that was a very, I would have been a spectator very quickly in this workout and watched everyone just keep going. But I think it served the purpose of what the Open was supposed to do, as far as, come on over, we can all play together. You might make it to where you thought. You might hit a challenge that stops your journey a little sooner than you thought. Hey, no worries, it's all good. And then let's watch and see how far the crazies can go and how fast they can get there. Wow. Yeah. And so I think this is going to be one of those workouts that you're like, holy smokes, that's an amazing performance.
There's already many times, when we're recording this, it's before the score submission has closed, and there's a ton of times coming in already that are 10 minutes and change, sub 10 minutes, which is just absurd. I mean, it's pretty awesome to see what people are capable of at this stage. And I think if we take it back to the average player, the person who's just there to challenge themselves a little bit, to throw their hat in the ring and have some fun with their friends, part of the utility of doing something like the Open is that you can use it as a bit of an assessment. And so hopefully over the 3 weeks, you can point to some really, maybe specific is the wrong word because we're generalists, right? But you can point to some attributes over those 3 weeks where like, okay, I was pretty solid on those elements, like my rowing and toes to bar. Man, I can see the benefit of the training I put in there. I was really happy with that. And I'm speaking about myself now. When I got to that thruster, I was like, yep, I have definitely been neglecting my strength training. I need to shore that up in the next couple of months. That's something that's clearly deficient when I look at the other elements that I was faced with and how I performed on them. And so, that again, that's when we take the whole thing in totality, that's my hope, is that people can come away from those 3 weeks and point to some things that they're like, hey, great, I can see the fruits of my labor. And hey, I've got some things I need to work on, and that can kind of guide me for the next little bit.
You can sketch these things out. You can have a great crew to test them. You can sit around with a bunch of experienced people and what if them. But sometimes until they're released to the wild, there are just things that you're like, didn't think anybody would do that, or that didn't quite go how we thought. As you look back, are there some, maybe not things that you wish had a do-over, but how you thought it would go in your mind's eye through everything that I just said, and then once it's released to the wild, any thoughts and observations in that, to some degree? We're not totally done, but looking in the rearview mirror.
Not yet. Okay. And to be fair, like I haven't had the kind of time to sit back and kind of do the forensics on that yet. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that'll start to emerge, but I don't have anything that jumps off the page at me around that. But you're right.
That's a good sign.
There's no amount of, but there's no amount of testing that can prepare you for what's going to come out when you have 300,000 people around the world throw themselves into this thing. It's just not possible to do. So you try to get as close as you can. But there's always some things that stand out and you're like, wow, okay, that's different than we expected. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad or that it needs to be changed. It's just one of those things that you can't predict the outcome. And to me, that's part of the fun, right? That's the nature of sport. You can speculate, you can kind of look at past performances, you can kind of look at where the field is and hope that you've got a clue. But at the end of the day, you got to run it to see what the outcome is. And that's the fun of it.
100%. Well, I think that's about all I got. Anything more that you think we should add, or things that are loose ends we didn't tie up?
No, I just, I hope people enjoyed it. And, I hope, again, that the mentality people enter into this type of thing with is serving them. And in my opinion, it's all about, all right, I'm stepping up to the plate, knowing that my absolute outcome is not the most important thing. The most important thing is, where's my training? What do I learn from this? How do I start to make some decisions moving forward based on what I did? Did I have a good time challenging myself with my community and my coaches and my friends? Those types of things, in my opinion, are what the Open is really all about. And the other kind of more high-end competitive aspects of it are icing on the cake.
Well, if people enjoyed it, fantastic. If you didn't, remember, it's Adrian's fault and he's the devil, so.
I was just saying, you beat me to the punch. I was going to say, if you liked it, you should email me. And if you didn't, you can tell Pat all about it.
I was going to say, leave your scathing comments in the in the section under this YouTube video on the btwb YouTube page. No, but thanks, man. I know you came. It's been a hectic last 3 weeks, to say the least, for you. And I think you came right from the airport to go.
I did,
hit the show.
Happy
so much,
to do it.
Much appreciated. Hope everybody enjoys it.
Yeah.
And I like peeling back the layers so that everyone, there's not too many people that get to actually see the time, thought, effort, accepted that goes into an event of any sort. So I think that's useful. Then, of course, there's just all kinds of good nuggets out there for CrossFit geeks, coaches, trainers, programmers to glean from this and make what they do better. So that's cool. As we always say, if you've got a thought, an idea for a new show, somebody that we should interview that you think's got a great story out there, leave it in the comments on the btwb YouTube channel under this particular show, and we'll go ahead and read them. If you participated in the Open, hey, free reign, as long as you're not hateful and vulgar, we don't censor you. We don't care what you say, good or bad. Post your thoughts to comments. We want to hear what they are. They make everybody better. And if you're interested in checking out the VNR cycles, help support the show, first pull up, push up, handstand walk, cool things like that, just go to the show notes and you can learn more about that stuff. And as we say each week, for Adrian Bosman, I'm Pat Sherwood. We appreciate your support, and we will see you next time.